Okay, this is the debate of the ages, the dilemma of the ages between predestination and free will. And I'm illustrating this with a line here where you've got two extremes. One is 100% free will, okay? And you would say, well, if it's 100% free will, then it's 0% God's choice. That means it's all up to us, and it's not up to God at all. And in the other extreme, we have 100% God's choice, 0% free will. That means it's all up to God and not up to us at all. And so the tendency is of what we've been calling Calvinism tends to push in this direction, God's choice, predestination. And the counter to that is Arminianism, which pushes towards man's choice, free will. And so people tend to fall on a different scale between these two extremes, these two radical extremes. And so I'll give this illustration to people and say, well, where do you fall in? Where would you put yourself? And if they consider themselves a really balanced person, balanced doctrinally, then they'll say, well, I'm going to put myself right here in the middle, 50-50. And then if they're more of a Calvinist, then maybe they'll kind of push it towards this direction. And maybe if they're against Calvinism, they'll kind of push it more towards this direction. But even in the middle, we've got something called 50-50. That means it's 50% our will and 50% God's will. That means, by implication, that it's 50% not God's will and 50% not our will. So you've got a dilemma there too, which is then, well, are we only partly in control of our own wills? And then is God only partly in control of his universe? And there doesn't seem to be any kind of reconciliation along that scale. Then the implications to that are, well, does man choose to believe, or is it that God elects? Now, if man totally, in the extreme, chooses to believe 100%, then that implies God has nothing to do with it. And if God elects, in the extreme, that means that this implies man has nothing to do with it. And so you see the dilemma here as well. Is it that we choose to believe and God has nothing to do with it? Or is it that God elects and we've got nothing to do with it? Or do you put yourself conveniently in the middle? And so, going along with that, then you have man chooses to reject, implies God has nothing to do with it. Or is it that man is, or some men, condemned already? Implies that man has nothing to do with it. And the debate goes on and on and on. And so this illustration is going to show the limit of this kind of thinking. And before I get to that, there's this concept that I call flatlands. There's this two-dimensional picture as it is. It's got this direction and this direction, but no depth. And there's these little people here that I drew on flat lands in their little house and a sun and a cloud and ground and so on. And they can move around along this plane. And what they don't realize is that I drew them. You see my pen is actually in the third dimension here. And so I can actually change this picture by drawing on it as I did create it in the first place. But they've got no concept of that because they can only go in that direction and that direction. And so it's just out of their mental capacity to be able to understand me, the creator. So a creation is outside of its creator, just like in this case the work of art is outside of the artist. And the artist is God over his artwork. The creator is God over his creation. And so I'm the one that made this picture, and it does what I want, and they don't really understand. So if you can imagine that they actually had the freedom themselves to move around, but only within this plane, then they could do that, and then they couldn't see me or understand me other than perhaps what is written. And so now I'm going to illustrate the man's limited ability to think about this, because all these people here are wrong. Just as these people had, on this flat land here, had limited understanding, so we too. And so we're making a debate which is really futile. And let me show you why. The truth is not in this flat drawing. The truth is in something that nobody really can conceive of. And so now, if I were to show you this three-dimensional picture here, you see that I'm going to put these together as best as I can with a piece of paper. And show you the true answer. The true answer gets rid of all that stuff, and in reality it is 100% free will and 100% God's choice, with all this other stuff out of the picture. Man chooses to believe, God elects. Man chooses to reject and is condemned already. Now, this illustrates the point that, again, we can't think outside the box. And the box is our three-dimensional universe, if you want to call that, the creation that we behold, that we are a part of, but yet God is outside of that creation. Now you might be thinking at this point, well, that's a nice illustration, really insightful, and I wonder, does this have anything to do, is this proved by the Bible? In a way it is, actually, because although the English translations cannot really do it justice, there's actually a verb tense in the New Testament writings, wherever you see the word, predestined or whatever. And it's the aorist tense, and the aorist tense states something as a fact as opposed to an action. It's a state rather than action on a timeline. It's indefinite and it's timeless. Okay, so in the same way that I've shown these point truths, 100% free will, 100% God's choice, man chooses to believe, God elects, okay, or man chooses to reject and is condemned already. The aorist tense simply states these things as a fact. So if you go into Romans 8, 28 through 30, or Ephesians chapter 1, and ponder those things, really it's this tense that says it just is, it's a fact. We are, as a fact, we have free will. As a fact, we are 100% God's choice. So it's not that on a timeline, it is taken out of eternity. And this video doesn't give the space to go into the grammar of Koine Greek in that way, but that's another discussion. But I'm saying, yes, this is supported by the Bible, it is biblical, and that's the way it is.